Okay, here we go. Okay, so for this part of the class, we're going to talk about the meat and potatoes of project 3, and that is adjustment layers and clipping masks. Now, an adjustment layer adjusts, it's a layer, right? It's a layer, and it adjusts color or contrast on every layer underneath it, okay? So for instance, I'll just show you a quick one. Here are my layers. Don't need this work layer. So if I put an adjustment layer on the top of the layers panel, it will affect everything. It'll affect every layer underneath it. So watch, the adjustment layer is this black and white circle. So it's like black and white circle. And there's a picture of it in your handout, which is kind of hilarious. Actually, it's very useful, but that's hard. That's a pain to do. So the instructor that put this together for you was very nice and got an image. So it's basically a black and white circle. So I'm going to click on it. Adjustment layer. Now, my favorite adjustment layer is color balance because I can adjust the colors. Now, whenever you do an adjustment layer, usually the properties open up. So let's see. Here are my properties. The properties panel, they open up. And the properties panel are how you can change adjustment layers or how you can change masks, depending on what you're selected. So if you selected a mask, you can change the mask. If you select a layer, you'll be able to, adjust it. So anyways, I have a color balance. I want this to be a little more magenta. I want it to be more red. So using the sliders, I wonder if I can make this bigger. Nope. Okay. I'm going to make it red. So I'm going to push this closer to red. I'm going to add a little bit of magenta and maybe a little bit of yellow. Oh, no. Never mind on the yellow. I don't want the yellow. I want it. That's a little bit of yellow. Let's see. Okay, but a little more red. I like the red. The red is combining. It's probably combining magenta and yellow. So there. So I have warmed up my overall project by using an adjustment layer. And it's on top, so it is affecting everything, right? So watch, I can hide it. So there it is. Wow. I typically love warm color. That's just my preference. And so this is a very common use of an adjustment layer for me and other Photoshop users. Usually you don't have like 7 adjustment layers. You're going to have 7 adjustment layers for your homework. And normally you don't use that many. Normally it's like 1 or 2. So like, for instance, you might have a photograph and you're like, I just want to warm it up a little. Well, you warm it up by just using an adjustment layer. Maybe that's pretty extreme. You may not warm it up that much. You might just do it a little bit. Like, maybe I can just do it a little. There, watch. So I just warmed it up a little bit, but if I hide the effect, yeah, you can tell the difference. That's usually the case. Normally you don't go crazy extreme, but you might in the future, right? Okay, so that's an adjustment layer. Now, and there's other adjustment layers. We'll talk about them, right? So that's it. Now, if I want this adjustment layer to only affect one layer, I can do that. Right now it's affecting everything. But if I want this adjustment layer to only affect one layer, I can do it. So here's how you do it. First, let's imagine this is down here. First, you need to move your adjustment layer so that it is on top of the layer you want it to affect. Well, I want to affect this model number 2. I want her to be kind of more warm in color. So what I do is I move and I just drag it in the layers panel. I just drag it up. So I'm going to drag it up so that it is on top of that layer, right? So there it is. And then, and I can see it, it's directly on top. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it a clipping mask. So how do you make a layer or an adjustment layer a clipping mask? Here's how you do it. You select the layer that you want to be a clipping mask. Then you go to option button for layers. So I go option for layers and then create clipping mask. Now a clipping mask means it's going to clip that layer to the layer you have selected. Ta-da! So watch, I'm gonna do it. Yeah, Dave, you didn't have to say ta-da. I know, sorry. It's subtle, but you can see, watch, I'll zoom in. It's only affecting her, right? So watch, I'm hiding the adjustment layer. So you can see now she's a little more blue. I make the adjustment layer visible again. You can see that she is being adjusted. This is a common use of a clipping mask if you have like a collage with multiple imagery. So like I want this model to be, maybe I want her to be warm in color, so I add a color balance that's kind of pushed to red. Maybe I want this other model to be purple, so maybe I'll do another color balance adjustment layer, kind of make it purple, and then apply it only to her layer. So individual layers can be modified by color or contrast, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I can identify this. I can't really make it bigger, but I can identify this adjustment layer as a clipping mask because number one, it's indented. So it's indented. And more importantly, it has this little arrow pointing down to the layer underneath it. And that tells me that this top layer is being applied or clipped to the layer underneath, right? So there it is. So that's a clipping mask. You know it's a clipping mask because there's a little bent arrow pointing down to the layer underneath. Now, I have to say this, but if it confuses you, just forget what I'm about to say. Some of you, and I would be the kind of person where I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna forget this because I would forget. Some of you are smarter than me at your age, and you're probably thinking to yourself, but Dave, in Illustrator, a clipping mask is something different. In Illustrator, a clipping mask is where you use the pen tool to trace around an object or a photo. And then it's a clipping mask in Illustrator is like a layer mask, except I use the pen tool to do a vector shape, and that's a clipping mask. How come a clipping mask in Photoshop is different? That's a good observation, and that's a good question that you have here. Let me give you the answer. The answer is Illustrator is wrong. Illustrator should call their clipping mask a vector mask. So Illustrator should call a clipping mask a vector mask in Illustrator, because that's what it is. It's a vector mask. You have a vector shape in Illustrator, like you use the pen tool to trace around a model, and you make that mask. It's a vector mask. In Photoshop, we can make a vector mask by using the pen tool. We'll learn about this soon, not this week. But what you do is you trace, like I would trace around the model with the pen tool, and I would make a vector mask. In Photoshop, it's called a vector mask because a clipping mask is something else. Now your question is, but Dave, isn't it the same company? Isn't it Adobe? Why would Adobe do something so confusing? Why would in Illustrator call something a clipping mask that should be called a vector mask when they know full well that in Photoshop, it's a vector mask? Let me tell you why. There's different teams at Adobe. So they have a Photoshop team and they have an Illustrator team. Now the Photoshop team, and these are like people that work on Photoshop, and there's people that work on Illustrator. And sometimes they get together like at the big Adobe company, and the Photoshop team, you know, they're kind of rude, and they're like, no, actually it's the other way around. It's Illustrator, and the Illustrator team, they're kind of nice. They're like nice people, they're mathematical. And they're like, oh, Photoshop, we noticed that you have a clipping mask named for when you use, they have no excuse. Illustrator needs to call it a vector mask, but they're like, we call it a clipping mask. Shouldn't you call it a clipping mask as well? And Photoshop's like, the team, this is what they say, I promise you. They're like, no, like we'll do whatever we want. We're Photoshop, we're the best. And Illustrator's like, are you sure? Like, and Photoshop's like, yeah, we're the best. Everyone loves Photoshop. So we're right and you're wrong. And then Illustrator's like, fine, whatever. And then they go away and they're like, we're just going to keep it the same. And it's confusing. But Photoshop is correct, even if they're being rude to the Illustrator team at Adobe, because it really is a vector mask. So if that's confusing, just remember a clipping mask in Illustrator, just start calling it a vector mask. And probably a few years down the line, you'll see they'll change it. They'll come around. They'll come around. So a vector mask in Photoshop is pen tool, but a clipping mask is when you apply one layer to another, kind of like what we're doing. And if that whole story and conversation is confusing to you, don't worry about it. Just forget it. Like that would have been me when I was like 20 years old. I'd be sitting in class about what is my teacher talking about? But it's a real big pet peeve of mine because it's confusing. They should call it the same. It should be a vector mask in Photoshop. It should be a vector mask in Illustrator. And it just irks me that they have different names, especially when a clipping mask means something else in Photoshop. Okay, so forget all that what I said. If that was confusing, forget what I said. A clipping mask in Photoshop is when you apply one layer to another. And usually we apply an adjustment layer to another layer. All right, now there are other kinds of adjustment layers, or there are different kinds of layers that we can apply to layers. Let me just show you real quick. A very common use, let me see if I can find a texture. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to do, let's see, I just want to do pattern. See what we got here. Pattern, I want to do images. Let's see if I can find a real interesting pattern. Let's see, I love this. Is this big? What's this image size on this? Okay, good. So I love this pattern. I want to apply this. I want to apply this to a one of my layers. So I'm going to copy and paste this. So I'm on the internet. Be careful when you search the internet, right? So I'm going to right click. I'm going to do, gosh, how do I want to do this? Do I want to drag it in? No, I didn't want to do that. Oh no. I'm going to copy it. I'll copy and paste it. So I'm going to go copy image. Then I'm going to go into Photoshop. I'm going to make a blank. You don't have to totally know about this. I'm going to make a new layer. It's already a clipping mask. I don't want it to be a clipping mask yet. So I have a blank layer, and now I want to paste that image onto this blank layer. So to paste is Control V. So there it is. Now I want to apply this to, it might look weird. I'm going to apply it to her boots. So here we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a clipping mask. And I already have a clipping mask on her, right? So, you know, I'll apply it to her dress. Okay. So I'm going to make it a clipping mask. So it's just a regular layer. So I'm going to go apply, create clipping mask. So there it is. It applied it to her. The problem is you can kind of see the outline, the silhouette of her body. Actually, it's kind of awesome. It'd be really cool if this was if this layer was big enough and she could just be a silhouette of this cool, like oily ooze. But anyways, I want to apply it to her, but it's a clipping mask. It's only applying to her layer, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to make a mask as well. So let's see. It didn't give me a mask. That's interesting. Okay. So here we go. Now, I can't see her dress, so I'm going to lower the opacity of this layer temporarily. There we go. Then I'm just going to, this isn't going to be very good, but you could imagine you would take your time. I'm just going to do it kind of fast. I don't have a good mouse. That's why I'm all irritated about making a mask. It stinks too, because it's like a gaming mouse, so you'd think it'd be a better mouse. Not for doing this. Okay, I'm just going to make a quick mask. Okay, here we go. And then I'm going to avoid her arm. Okay, so this was not a very good mask. So you would take, if you do something like this ever, I want it on her, I want it on this too. You would take your time. I'm just doing this fast because I'm demonstrating, right? Okay, so I have a selection. And I want this to be a layer mask. So I'm going to apply it. So here we go. I'm just going to go layer mask. And so there it is. And now I can put that at 100%, or I could, it doesn't look good at 100%. But you can see that now I have a layer of this pattern. It's like this oily ooze. It's a clipping mask being applied to this model layer, and I also have a mask to hide out to hide the rest of it. Now, as you could tell, it looked better at a lower opacity so that it could blend in with, let's see, I could lower the opacity so that it blends in with the seams and the wrinkles and the folds of that original dress. So that looks pretty good. Now, my mask is terrible. It's okay, but it's not very good. I'd have to touch it up, right? But you can see the potential of applying textures, layers, or just adjustment layers to other layers, and we can combine them and make them change the color, change the design. Let me check one more thing. Another thing that I can change is the blending mode of this. I'm going to put this back to 100%. Right now it's a normal blending mode, but there are different blending modes that I can experiment with that help it blend with the layer underneath. Let me try overlay. Overlay looks pretty good. Some of these, so these are lightened, kind of lightened versions. These are darkened. I like this. Ooh, that one's nice. Linear burn, kind of add some saturation to it. Here's an inverse. So difference and exclusion are like they invert the colors. That's kind of cool. I don't know if I like the greens. Hue. Oh, I really like these. I'm surprised you can, that's interesting. Okay, that's great. Anyways, overlay. I like overlay. I'm going with overlay. So there it is. I can apply these. I can apply these as clipping masks. Okay, so enough of that. You're like, oh my gosh, Dave, do I have to get images from the internet and apply them to my No, you don't have to, but I did show you how to do it. You just go to Google, you copy the image, make sure it's a high resolution, copy an image or a pattern, you can copy an image. Then you have a blank, I wonder if I can just paste it in. Let me try. Control V. Oh, okay. So if you just paste it, it'll automatically put it on its new layer. That's even easier. So copy, paste. All right, there it is. You can do that if you want, but you don't have to. And you can use it as a clipping mask. You need some clipping masks. All right, all right. So now let's talk about adjustment layers. So we talked about the basics of clipping masks. In fact, I'm gonna move this down. I don't want to see it. And so we talked about the basics of clipping masks. The most basic one is color balance. And then don't forget, adjustment layers can be found at the bottom of your layer panel, and it's the black and white circle button. So here are our adjustment layers. There's many of them. A lot of them act the same. So I'll just tell you my favorite ones first. So go to my favorite ones first, and then you can experiment. You don't have to use my favorite ones, but you can look at those and try them out. Then you can experiment with different ones, but you want to have many different adjustment layers. I assume you can get adjustment layers over here. Let's see. Or not. Oh, here it is. Never mind. Yeah, so right here, adjustment layers. I never do it from the layer menu, but you can get your adjustment layers this way. Whenever you make an adjustment layer, it will apply it. It will apply the new adjustment layer on top of whatever layer you have selected. So because I have my top layer selected, it'll put it on top of that. So let's just try levels. So I'm going to do levels. Hit OK. So here's a levels adjustment layer. Levels is pretty useful. Let's see if I can move this out so you can see it better. I wish I could make this bigger. Come on, properties, come on. Can I make you bigger? Oh, it kind of gets bigger. Let's see. It only gets wider. Let me see. Nope. Okay, well, here it is. Here it is. So the nice thing about levels are you can lighten an image, you can darken an image, and you can adjust the contrast that's in the middle. So for instance, if now this image is pretty bright already, and this adjustment layer is not clipped. It's not only clipped to this model, so it's actually going to affect everything at the moment. So that's okay. Let's watch to see what happens. If I push, there's like a little white sample here. If I push it, everything's going to get brighter. Now, if you ever do something like this with a levels adjustment layer, you want to be careful that your lighter highlights and your whites don't blow out. And what do I mean by blow out? I mean like, well, like it just becomes solid white and it's just too bright. Like you want to avoid that. So let's see, let's go back. Like if you lose, like there's some shadows in her kind of white blouse or dress, right? And I want to see those shadows. But if I increase this too far, those shadows, whoa, or accidentally do that, you'll lose those details. So you don't want to do that. They call that, sometimes they call it, it just blows out like the highlight, and you want to avoid that. Digital photographers might have another term as well, but that's what I call it. Okay, so there it is. But I can brighten this image a little, so I can brighten it a little. So maybe, I think the best advice for adjustment layers is what's the word? Moderation. Don't go too crazy, but then don't do too little so that you don't see anything. But moderation, like not crazy effect. Like don't get too excited about these wonderful settings and options we have. Now, if I wanted this to be overall darker, I can just move the dark. So this is like everything's getting darker, right? Okay. And then if I just wanted more contrast, that's the gray. And usually you push it towards, yeah. So if I increase the number, it gets less contrast. It's like washing out and everything looks faded and washed out. That is typically not good. Although if you have a ton of contrast and you just want to be a little bit, you just you just do a little bit, right? But normally you give it, is this like a negative number? I think it starts at like 1. And if I go negative, it's going to add contrast, right? So that's that. How do I use brightness contrast? Here, let me cancel it, because I think I messed that all up. So just let me do it again. Oh, that was interesting. Why did it not throw it away? Can we throw it away? Okay. So here it is. I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to go brightness contrast. No, I'm sorry, levels. Levels I meant to say. So I got levels. Yeah, so it's 0, 255, and 1. Okay, so usually what I do is if I need to brighten something, I brighten it a little, but then I lose contrast. So I decrease this number to get some of my contrast back. So I usually use a combination of that. Let's see what it did. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. I think it's a little too much, but that's okay. But that's how you brighten and then you add a little contrast. Ta-da. Now I want to apply this to my model only. I don't want to apply it to everything. I want it to only be applied to her. So again, I place it on top of, I want to place it on top of my model layer, but there's already a clipping mask there. So now what do? Well, you just place it on top of the clipping mask, which is on top of the layer you want it to affect. Okay, so it's on top of the other clipping mask. I'm just going to go Option, Create Clipping Mask, and there it is. So now it only affects her. How can I tell? I can hide it. Oh yeah, big difference, right? So that looks good. I like it. I think it looks a little better. Is it too much? That's up to your art director. Let's see. I like it, but I think it's a little too much. But that's just me. I think it looks good. So it's good. All right, so I have 2 clipping masks on 1 layer, and you can do that. You can have as many clipping masks as you want affecting 1 layer, but normally it's like 1, right? It depends. It depends. Now, if you don't want to detach these, but if you ever want to release, if you ever want a layer that's a clipping mask to be released and just to be a normal layer again, you can do it. It's called release. So watch, I would go options. There it is, release clipping mask. So release clipping mask, and then it will become a regular layer. I'll just show you. Don't do this though, but watch. So now it's it's not a clipping mask anymore. And now this levels adjustment layer is affecting all the layers underneath it. It's affecting all the layers underneath it, right? So there it is, ta-da. And I can hide it and you can see it's affecting everything. Now, some of you are smart and you're like, yeah, I don't want to do clipping masks, even though I'm supposed to. And you're like this, you'll be like this, Dave, if, this is a lazy student talking, by the way. So this is how they sound. They're like, Dave, if the clipping mask is on top of the bottommost layer, and there really is no other visible layers underneath it, because a clipping mask, I'm sorry, a clipping mask, an adjustment layer will only affect layers underneath it. Well, I only have 1 visible layer underneath this adjustment layer, right? So technically, I do not need to make that a clipping mask. That is true, because it's only going to affect this background layer. That's true. But for the sake of your homework, for the sake of your grade, even though technically I do not need to clip this adjustment layer to the background, because there's only that's the only visible layer underneath it, so it's the only layer being affected, still make it a clipping mask for this assignment, because that's part of your grade and just for practice, right? So I would position this on top of my background, it's affecting it, and I'm going to make it a clipping mask. The adjustment layer is going to be a clipping mask. So I'm going to go option for layers, create clipping mask. So there it is. So technically that's correct. But in the real world, if you didn't want to do that, yes, you could have just left it not a clipping mask, right? But for my homework, it will be, right? Okay. One more thing. Let's see. Let's see. We have. Let me hide some of this stuff. I want to talk about this. Okay, I got to move this. This is in the way. I'm going to hide some of these other layers. You can hide a bunch of layers rapidly by dragging over them, dragging over all the eyes, kind of like in Illustrator can do that. Now, there's another thing you need to do with your clipping mask. You also need to mask it. You need to mask the effect of an adjustment layer. So let's look at this. Currently, this adjustment layer is affecting everything on this background image. It is, that's fine. But let's imagine I do not want it to affect, here, I don't want it to affect this tombstone right here, this tombstone. So what I can do is there's a mask. You'll notice that there is a mask already attached to my adjustment layer, right? But it's not doing anything. It's not hiding anything because it is pure white. Like that image adjustment layer is pure white. So it is not masking anything, but I can paint black in that mask to hide the effect on whatever I want. So that's what I'm going to do. So let's see. And you have to do this in your homework. You have to pick something that you don't want to have the effect happening. So I don't want this gravestone to be affected. So I make sure that the mask is selected on my adjustment layer. It is. There's a little frame around it. I'm going to get my paintbrush and black, and I'm going to paint black. And It's not affecting it that much, but you can see that it's affecting it. So let's see here. Maybe I'll affect this this gravestone too. So it's subtle. Now it's hard to see, but there's a little black mark. There's a little black mark in my mask now, meaning the effect of this adjustment layer is hidden because of this mask. There's a mask on the adjustment layer. And you're like, well, I can't tell the difference. I know it's very subtle. It's a very subtle effect. But when I hide this whole layer, you'll be like, oh, I can tell. So watch, here it is. So here you can see that the effect was never applied to these two gravestones, but it was affected to everything else. So there it is. Now we'll talk more about that, but you need to have 3 of these in your project. So I'll show you that really soon, because that's confusing, and I know it can be. It works really good like on a dress. So let's see. Let's go back to my model here. Here she is. I have color balance, so she's red. But let's imagine I don't want it on this right here. So I don't want the effect of that red right here. So let's see. So I'm going to go here, and I can paint it out. This is hard. This will take time, but I can paint out the effect. There you can see they're kind of blue now. So you can kind of pick it. You can be selective on what. Ugh. So you can be selective on what your adjustment layer is affecting. So here it affects everything but her stockings there, right? So there is red applied everywhere except right here. And I could have done it on her dress. I could have done it on her boots, but I just wanted to affect that one little thing. So I can be selective, and that's the power of these masks. Now, I don't use these very often. Let's see. But you can see that it can be useful. Your art director might be like, warm up this image, but don't warm up her skin. So like you'd go in and you would mask out her skin on that color balance, right? Or your art director might say, warm up the whole image, but don't warm up her hair. Or her lips, don't warm up her lips. And so you would go in, and in the mask, you would paint black. Like I do want her lips to be warm, but I could go in and I could paint black in the mask so that her lips are not affected. So now you can see, well, it might be small, but her lips are not affected by that warming adjustment layer. Like her skin is warm, but not her lips. So there, you have options. Okay, but let's talk about the other adjustment layers. So let's see, I just want to show you what they are. Color balance, well, let me talk about why color balance is my favorite. So I'm going to click on it. Really? It didn't, where's my, I lost my properties. Did I close it? Here, just let me make a new one. Goodness. Somehow I accidentally closed my properties panel. If you ever lose a panel, you can open it under window. I know that properties is either behind something or I closed it because there's no check mark on it. So I can click it to open it up. I wonder if it was behind. I don't know. Anyways, ooh, don't attach. Okay, here it is, properties. So again, so why do I like color balance so much? It's a very easy way to adjust overall color. And sometimes, especially if you have a collage of many images, they look different because they're from different sources. So if here, let me make some of these visible again. I got that flower, I got this model, I've got the tree, I got the frame. So I have many different images from different sources, and they're colored differently. Well, if I add a little bit of the same color to everything, it feels like they belong to each other. So watch, I can add a little bit of red. It kind of helps them feel like they belong a little more. It would look better if this wasn't turned on. Okay. So now, if I add a little bit of red to everything, it helps it feel like they all belong. You could call that keying in everything, or color correction, whatever you like. It's kind of like color correction because I'm making everything similar so that it belongs a little more. But sometimes they call it keying in, like a key, like they do it for film. They'll key in different shots so that, like, if this shot's really cool and this shot's really warm, then the cool shot, they'll add some warm color so that they feel like they belong a little better. But whatever, don't worry about that. But this is my favorite because it's so easy to use. Now, normally when you use color balance, it only adjusts the midtones, but the midtones are usually what you want to adjust. It's usually the most convenient thing. And so normally that will give you the desired effect that you want, but you can change it. You can go into the shadows and you can change, like, so watch, it's right here, tone. So like I could go to the shadows and I can make them more red. And then I could go into the highlights. It's getting too red though, in my opinion. I could go to highlights and I can make that more red, right? So there it is. Another thing you could do though is, if you wanted, you could go shadows. Maybe I want to be a different, maybe I want my shadows to be blue. Maybe a little more blue in the shadows, but my highlights, I want to be more red and yellow. That might give you a color shift. Shadows are a complementary color to your highlight colors. Shadows are purple, highlights are yellow. Shadows are green, which would look ugly. Highlights are red. You don't have to think about that or do that. It's just something that's a benefit from this. Normally, I think that way, but I don't normally do that. Normally, I just adjust the midtones. Normally, it's like, I want my overall image to be a little more red or magenta or blue, and I adjust it just a little bit. And it works very nice. So color balance is very convenient. Color balance is also very effective for applying it to an individual layer. Okay, I'm trying to see more of this flower. Color balance is also very effective for applying it to an individual layer. So for instance, if I want this flower to be more purple or blue, I can use an adjustment layer. Here's how you might do it. First, I select, if you wanted to change the flower, I select the flower layer first, because whenever I make a new layer or a new adjustment layer, it will place it on top of the layer that's selected. Well, my flower layer is selected. So I'm going to go new adjustment layer, and I want to do color balance. Color balance. So there it is. Now, before I change the settings, I can make this a clipping mask so that it clips to the flower and only affects the flower before I change the effects. So I'm going to do that. So here's my, I wonder if I can right click it. Yeah, you can right click it. So you can right click, create clipping mask. So there it is. I right clicked it. It's a clipping mask. I could have gone to the options and to create clipping mask, but there it is. It's a clipping mask now. Now I need to change the properties. If you have an adjustment layer, but you don't change the properties, it will not count for your grade. Because if it's not doing anything, if it's not adjusting it, it's not a proper adjustment layer. Okay, fine. So I said purple. Let's see what I can do. Let's see if it's going to look good. That didn't do anything. The blue, okay. Oh, I could go cyan. Well, that's okay. I need to go shadows. So because I want to be more purple, so I'm going to go shadows. Now I'm going to add some more blue and maybe a little bit of magenta. You can see that you can have fun with this, right? So I'm having too much fun. I'm having too much fun adjusting my flower. But that's it. Now, how do you, now that you can obviously tell that I changed the look of that flower. But if you have a subtle effect on something, how do you know? How do I know that you actually did something with the properties panel? Well, I usually temporarily turn off your adjustment layer. So it's like this. I got color. I'm like, hide it. Oh, wow. That was originally orange. Now it's kind of purple. I look at this one. I got this color balance on this model. Okay. Oh, no. Oh, that's on everything. It's this one. So it's like, oh, okay, well, there's an adjustment layer clipped to this model. Me as your instructor, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to hide the effect, and I want to see a difference. It's like, oh yeah, I can tell the model is warmer. So there should be a change when you hide the adjustment layer. If not, you may have forgotten to change the settings in the property panel, the properties panel, right? So make sure you make your adjustment layer. You can clip it and then adjust it, or you can just make your adjustment layer, change the settings, and then clip it. I leave it up to you. But you got to change the properties. And don't forget, if you ever lose your properties panel, if it disappears or it's lost, you go to Window menu. All your panels can be found under Window. So you go here, it's like, oh, properties, there it is. If there's no check mark there, that means you have to open it up. Okay, anyways, color balance, my favorite. My other favorite is levels. I do like levels, but try not to be carried away with levels. So again, I'll just quickly show you. The only reason I'm going to show you again is because it's very useful. So levels. Now this is not clipped to anything that's going to affect everything. Usually use it to make your image a little bit brighter and then maybe add a little bit of contrast. So you adjust the gray to adjust the contrast. It's probably not called contrast, it's probably called gamma or something stupid like that. But it affects your value, right? Your midtones value, right? This is like, if you want things to be a little darker, you can make things a little darker as well. But remember, moderation. Levels is good. Levels is good. I'm going to hide that. There's an easier one that's easier than levels. It's it's called brightness contrast. I like this a lot. Sometimes if I just want something to be a little bit brighter, I'll use, like if I want my overall project to be a little brighter, sometimes I'll just use brightness contrast. What you can do is you can just brighten everything. Now, obviously that's too much, right? So moderation. And then what happens is when you brighten an image, it gets washed out. You can see it's getting washed out. So that is why they include contrast. If you add a little bit of contrast, you get some of that value back in. It's kind of, brightness contrast is kind of like adjusting the white and gray level in a levels adjustment layer. It's very similar effect. Okay. What do I recommend? I recommend a third contrast to your brightness to start with. Then you can change it around. So like if I did 30, and this is just a recommendation. If you do 30 brightness, I would recommend you start with 10 contrast. That's my recommendation. And then you can like, well, I need a little more contrast. Well, then add it. Or I need a little less contrast. That's fine. But I always recommend a third contrast to your brightness when you begin with a brightness contrast, and then you can change it around. If you give it a negative brightness, it'll get darker. So it's similar to levels. Levels, I think, is a little more precise. You know, I use this a lot, but you can tell that this is very similar to levels. So that's okay. You can use either or. That's fine by me. Let's see, what else do we have? We have curves. Curves is a tricky way to do everything. So let's see. I don't use curves very often, but some people love it. So usually what people do when they do curves is they bend it a little. And what that does is that makes it a little brighter and adds a little more contrast, like just instantly. And they could, let's see, they can do it a lot. Let's see what happens. Whoa, that's too bright. This makes it darker. I can lower, let's see, what's this? I can lower it. So it kind of adjusts everything at the same time. It adjusts brightness, contrast, saturation. It's like all at the same time. And usually people just do it a little bit. They do it like this, because this is typically a little brighter and a little more. Let's see if I can get more nope, is this contrasty? Nope. It's like this. I don't use it very often, so I'm not very practiced. But some people love it, so you could like research it and use it. But usually it ends up being something like that. Whatever, that's curves. I typically use levels. I like levels. It's just easier for me, you know. Okay, exposure. I've never used exposure. I assume it's going to make it brighter or darker. Let's find out. Brighter, darker. Gamma, is this saturation? Yeah. Okay, so again, this is nice. So this is, so I never use this, but this is similar to photography. So like, it just depends on how you're trained. Are you a trained photographer? Like you love digital photography and you love like, you actually like develop your own film? Then some of these things like exposure means like, I think, is it the higher the exposure, the more bright and washed out it's gonna be. Let's see. Yeah. And then the less exposed, the darker it's going to be. So that's like on your camera settings, right? So whatever. I don't typically do this, but there it is. That's something you can do. I think, can I select a middle value? Let's see, this is values. Oh, nice. I can select my highlights. It looks like it adjusts it to my highlight. Here's my lightest light. Okay. But whatever, so you can adjust things and there's complexity in it, but okay, that's good. It's very similar to brightness, contrast, and levels. So like I said, and you can tell they're all in the same category. So this is like the brightening or whatever, the light level, the values. So lights, darks, they're all in the same area. Okay, then we have saturations, okay, and color and saturation. All right, vibrance is pretty popular. Let's see here. Let me hide this. Do I like vibrance? I never use it, but I like it. So let's see. Oops, wrong one. Let's try it. Vibrance. Basically, it makes things more saturated. Gosh, what's the difference between vibrance and saturation? That's a good question. That appears. Oh, ooh, oh. I see the difference. Okay, let's see saturation. Saturation could basically be darker, I bet. Oh no. So if you want to go grayscale, you can go saturation. They have saturation on another adjustment layer that I like. So this is just saturation and vibrance. It's kind of nice. If you want grayscale, so color, grayscale, you just go saturation -100. Vibrance does add, it makes it a little, but again, moderation. Don't go too crazy. So maybe I would do something like this. Now let's see if I can see the result. I'm going to hide it. Oh yeah, I can see it in the flower. It's vibrant. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, vibrance and saturation. All right, so that's something that's popular among my students. I don't use it much myself, but I do like it. Hue and saturation. Okay, so this is hue and saturation. Okay, so let's see. I want to select a specific. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Hue and saturation works best on, boy, maybe I want to do it on this picture frame. Let's see. Where's this picture frame? Here it is, that brown. So the picture frame is brown and it's mostly the same color. Hue and saturation, I can change brown. I can change it if an image is mostly the same color, hue and saturation works best. So this brown picture frame is mostly brown, so I'm going to do it there. So again, how do I do my adjustment layer? How do I recommend it? First, select the layer you want to affect. So I selected the brown picture frame. I want, whenever you make an adjustment layer or a new layer, it always places it directly on top of the layer you have selected. And that's what I want. I want my adjustment layer to be on top of my picture frame. So I selected my picture frame. Now I'm going to go adjustment layer button on the bottom of my layers panel. I'm going to pick hue and saturation. Now, before I change anything in the properties panel, I want to make it a clipping mask so that it only affects the picture frame layer. Now it's on top of the picture frame. And I can just right click it. I can just right click this, right click, create clipping mask. So now it's a clipping mask. How do I know it's a clipping mask? It has this little bent arrow, it's pointing down, right? It's only going to affect the layer underneath it. Okay. And let me hide this person. She's gone. Okay, so now we just see the brown, right? Now here's what I can do. It's obviously going to adjust color, but let's see, it should affect that brown overall. So let's see, we got green. It's weird. I have a spectrum. I have like a hue spectrum. And it's like kind of the opposite. This is like a yellow, which is kind of the opposite of like this blue purple. So if I go yellow, it'll probably make it purple. Yeah, right. But here you can see this is hue and saturation is very convenient for a solid color or an almost solid color image. So you can see that looks great. I love that purple, looks fun. The purple's fun and it contrasts very well with like the yellow green behind it. I like it a lot. Now there's other settings here. This looks, in my opinion, this looks darn good. And remember, moderation, right? Moderation. This looks pretty good. It looks like it's painted purple. It doesn't look too blown out. It's saturated, but it's not too saturated. But you will notice that there is a saturation option. So let's say my art director comes in and it's way too saturated. Well, I can desaturate it a little bit. So I can desaturate it. Actually, that's pretty good. It looks more natural because things aren't, if I increase the saturation, it's going to look like it's glowing. I like that bright color. But when you print, if I printed this out on paper, it wouldn't print that vibrantly. So I would probably, sadly, I would decrease the saturation a little bit so it looks a little more natural. And then they also have lightness down here. That's if I want to be brighter or darker, but I'll just show you. Lighter. You can see it's getting washed out though. So you don't want that. I can make it a little darker. It doesn't look too bad. I'm going to keep it back at 0. Oh gosh. I highlighted. I'm just going to type 0 to get 0. If your photograph has good values, lights and darks, you don't need to change that. But that's pretty good. So that's the benefit. I like this purple. I don't want to change it, but this is going to make it blue. Oh, excellent. Blue, different. So it's like a spectrum. It's like a hue spectrum. And I can really, let's see what we got here. I really liked that purple. Okay, so I'm going back to the purple. There. Okay, so that's it. So that might be a nice consideration for that picture frame because it's mostly a solid color. It kind of works with the flower too, but the flower has more than one color. It has like the yellows and the reds, but you can try it. It might work good. But that's hue and saturation. I tend to use that as well. I'm just adjusting colors. So anyways, there it is. Let's see, color balance. Oh, color balance is what I showed you. Color balance is my favorite. Black and white, what's that going to do? So it made it grayscale. So let's see. Okay. And every layer underneath is, oh, I can adjust certain things to be grayscale. Oh, how fun is that? So this is a little more complicated. It doesn't just automatic. I can adjust my values. Oh, excellent. Oh, okay. So you have a little more flexibility with your values when you use the black and white adjustment layer. But you will notice that, I'm just going to delete this guy. You could also get that with, if you just bring the saturation all the way down to, like if I did hue and saturation and put the saturation all the way to 0, everything underneath it would be grayscale as well. So you can do that as well. That's what I tend to do, but I have less control. You notice that I had less control over those values, and that's good for a photographer. So it's good to be aware of. Okay, let's see. I'm talking about all these. Let's see. Photo filter. Okay. Well, first I gotta get rid of this. Okay, wait, this guy's gone. Oh no! Oh no! Oh, it's this one. Okay, this one's gone. I did something here. Delete. I want my purple back. There it is. Okay. So now, what about photo filter? Let's see. I'm going to apply a photo filter to my person here. So let's see. Here she is. She's back. So again, I selected her layer. I'm going to make an adjustment layer. So let's see. I'm going to do photo filter. Then now this is going to affect every layer underneath unless I make it a clipping mask. If it's a clipping mask, it'll only affect her underneath. So here I go. I'm going to go option, create clipping mask. It's almost break time. Create clipping mask. So now if I change the photo filter, it's only going to affect her layer. Okay, so right now it's set to, it's kind of like this warm, nice warm filter. Let's see, I can go deep red. Okay. So you can see that, you know, when you're in photography, they have filters that you put on the lens, and you put the filter on the lens. It's like a red filter you put on the lens. And then when you take photography, it'll add that red to the color of your image that you do. And typically they do this for clouds, like, and I forget which filter they use. I don't know if it's like a red filter. Like there's filters that only, I'm not a big time photographer, but I do know that they sometimes, if you have a photograph and the clouds are wonderfully blue, like this rich blue, they used a photo filter. And I want to say it's a red filter. I could be completely wrong, but I think a red filter makes the sky more vibrant blue, which doesn't make sense. But I'm not 100% sure. The reason why I don't really know too much about it, because nowadays photographers are less likely to actually use a filter on their camera. They just change it in Photoshop. So they might change it with this, or I just use color balance, or I select my clouds and I just increase the blue that way. So there's so many, like 30 years ago before Photoshop, 30 or 40 years ago before Photoshop, they would use photo filters. Nowadays, it's like, just use Photoshop to change the color. As I just showed you, it's so much easier and it's more intuitive and you have more fine control. Well, photo filter is just another way to change color. Like deep red is going to make her more red. It does appear a little different than color balance. Normally I would just use color balance, but it appears that this is applying the red to her light, her highlights, her shadows, and her midtones all at the same time. So it is a slightly different effect, and it is kind of interesting. But anyways, but this is simple. I just use color balance, but some students like photo filter, so go for it. It's like, I want her to be more orange. I'm going to put an orange filter on her and just increase it. Or I want blue. I don't want blue. What's this underwater? It's like a sea green, filter. Actually, it has an effect. So these are basically just another way to change the color. What's this? Oh, can I actually pick the color? Oh, delightful. Okay, good. So here it's like they have filters. They have filters, but you're like, I don't want any of these colors. I want to make my own. You could click on color here, click on the box, and then you can adjust it. Like, I want an ugly green. Actually, I want a pink filter, magenta, and I want it to be this color for my filter. I'm going to hit OK. So you can actually mix your own. You can mix your own color filter if you like. So that's a nice, actually, I kind of like that. That looks kind of nice. So it's just another way to mix color. A lot of my students like it. Okay, now we're getting into some weird stuff that I never use. Boy, channel mixer, I've never used this. Oh, okay. So let's see. Oh, this is going to monkey with my channels. Okay, so this is going to adjust my, okay. This is going to adjust, I'm not going to do it. Let's see. Well, let's see what it does. Yeah. So what happens is, I don't even want to explain it. I won't spend time. I'm working in RGB and I have 3 channels. And so I have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. Normally, when you print, it's CMYK. So this would be more useful if I was in CMYK mode. And let's say it's like, I want to add a little bit of cyan overall. I could do it. You can add a little bit of cyan, but I'm, or magenta, or, black. They got black here. Is this black? Woo! Actually, I really like this. It's making it very vibrant. Because it's RGB, it's making my colors very vibrant, because RGB is it's like screen. It's lit color, as opposed to CMYK, which is additive. I think it's additive, or printed color. It's added on top, and so it's not as vibrant. Actually, this is fun. This is actually but be like, again, use if you adjust RGB. So what is this? This is a channel. I forgot what this is called, channel mixer. Moderation, because this won't print well. This will look great on a digital device, like on a phone or on a computer. This is actually making my colors very beautifully vibrant, so it's nice. But just be careful, moderation. Just remember moderation. I do like that. So, okay, I never use it though. It's good. Okay, let's see. Now let's go into some color lookup. I'm not going to do that. So invert will flip all my colors. So for instance, my flower, let's see. Okay, flower, I'm gonna go new adjustment layer. I'm gonna do invert. It's gonna invert everything. Let's see, invert. So it inverted everything except for the layers on top. So it didn't affect the picture frame and the model because they're on top. But I only want this inversion to affect the flower. So here it is. I just need to make it a clipping mask so it only affects the flower. Create clipping mask. So there it is. It only affects the flower. Actually, it looks pretty interesting. It looks kind of spacey. It looks like science fiction. I can lower the opacity of this inversion. Like maybe I can lower that to, oh yuck, that's terrible. Ooh, that didn't work. Okay, never mind. How come? Normally this will, oh, does not work well. Normally if you, let's see, do I have photo filter here? So she's kind of, I can adjust the opacity of an adjustment layer and it will lessen the effect. So if you have an extreme effect, you can lessen it. Let's try it on this purple here. Let's see, I got this hue and saturation. I'm going to lower the opacity of that adjustment layer. Let's see. And what it's doing is, so now that the purple on this hue and saturation adjustment layer is only at 50%. So it's mixing with the brown underneath it, and it's giving me this kind of wine color. So you can adjust the amount of these, but for some reason the invert, it was making it gray and ugly. So that wasn't good. But invert is fun. It creates a it creates a film negative effect sometimes, especially if your image is black and white. If your image is black and white and you invert it, it will make a nice film negative effect. I don't have time to show you, but just take my word for it. I would do, oh my gosh, I'm going to do it. So here we go. Let's see. I'm going to go, no, I'm not. So I would do like a hue saturation on this model. I'd put it -100 saturation, should be grayscale. Then I would add another adjustment layer. It would be invert, and she would look very similar to a film negative, a black and white film negative. And it's fun. You can do a lot of fun, interesting effects with Photoshop like that. Okay, it's almost break time. Let's see. I talked about everything. Invert, posterize. Okay, just let me quickly show you these. Posterize, I never use it, but it might be interesting. I'm just gonna go to my model. So let's see, because she's like on top. Okay, so here we go. Posterize. Posterize, I believe, will limit her color palette. Let's find out. Yes. Oh, okay. It's actually limiting. Can I? Oh, I can adjust it. Very good. Okay. So that's like normal. Let's see. So again, it's giving it a gritty effect. This feels like, if you remember from, it's not clipped only to her, so it's affecting everything. It gives it a very painterly effect. It's very similar to, in Illustrator, we had the image trace. So this is reminiscent of the image trace. Now, do you want to use it? Actually, it's kind of interesting. It might look interesting on one of your images. You can be creative, like your project can look strange. So that's fine. But that's posterize, right? Yeah. It limits the color panel. Here is just normal, so you wouldn't want to do that. You want it to be funky. I like it. I like it. It's okay. I never use it though, but it might serve its purpose. Okay, finally, let's see. What else do we have? Threshold. Oh, okay. Threshold is very reminiscent of an image trace, a black and white image trace from Illustrator. I can adjust the values. This is going to give me more darks. This is going to give me more lights if I adjust this, the threshold. Yeah. That's kind of nice. Now let me check though. Let me see if I can lower the opacity. Let me see what happens. Is it going to get funky? Oh, that's kind of cool. So if I lower the opacity of this threshold adjustment layer, some of the color is seeping back in. So again, this is making a very abstract looking image effect. Is it good? I'll leave it up into the eye of the beholder. These effects only look as good as they are fulfilling your need. What is your need for your design? Does it need to look all bright colored? Like, does it need to look all crazy retro, bright colors and, you know, pixelation? Then yeah, this is definitely approaching that effect. If I just want to invert colors, but I don't want a pixelated effect, then I don't want to use threshold. I probably want to use more invert instead. So it depends on what the goal of your design is. That's how you know if it's effective or not. I don't normally need to invert my colors, so that doesn't achieve my goals, if that makes sense. I think I've talked about all these. Gradient map. Boy, I've never used that. What's this gonna do? Are these my gradients? Oh, here we go, gradients. Okay, I got blue. Okay, that's cool. Now can I adjust it? Let's see. Oh, I can reverse it. Oh, okay. So I have a gradient. Let's see. But I'm curious how different this is. Now it's a gradient. I can adjust the opacity. I can change, now this is set to normal. I can change this to be in a different kind of, yeah. Oh, this is kind of nice. It looks like I could have achieved this with a regular gradient. Okay, but that's interesting. Okay, so it's gone. Never used it. So that's it. We talked about all of them. We talked about all the image adjustments, and we're going to take a break real soon. So, okay, so here's what we talked about. We talked about all the image adjustments. You need to use image adjustments are the easiest thing to do for clipping masks. So that's why I showed you all of them. You can change colors, you can invert things, you can do value changes with levels. So there's a lot of interesting things we can do with adjustment layers. We're going to take a break and I'm going to stop recording. I guess there's going to be a third video on this. So we'll have a third video. My goodness. So let's see.